Lesson, we're going to be writing some simple JavaScript code to get more familiar with how to write the code. So we've got a pop-up message that's showing up that's coming from the second line in the code. The first line is outputting the window, and the reason the code has stopped executing is that it's waiting for a user interaction. And this is what we mean when we talk about JavaScript being single-threaded, that it can only execute one single sequence of instructions, and if any of the code is stopping or preventing us to move on to the next line of code, we're going to get this where we're not going to get the rest of the execution of the code. So once we do take the action and we click OK, it's going to go through and render out the following lines of code in sequence going from top to bottom. Go ahead and open up the editor, and within the HTML file, we're going to be linking it to the JS file. So create the JS file that you want to use. And in this example, from the previous lesson, we've got a console message. So when the file loads, it reads through the HTML code. When it encounters the JavaScript code, at that point it goes to the JS file, and it's going to render out the content from that JS file. So if you were to include it or link it earlier within the code and run that, you could actually link to the same JS file, and you're going to see it being rendered out at this point within the code, and then also at this point within the code. So it's going to render it out at the moment that it encounters the code. So within the JS file, the sequence that the code gets rendered out is from top to bottom. So if you have several different console messages, and you have this one as hello1 and hello2, they're going to get rendered out at the point where the code is being encountered. Within the JavaScript code as well, there's different types of console messages that you can output. So using the console object, you can also output an error message. So what this will do is this will display the message in the console within the red background within the Chrome browser, and it will attach more attention to that error. You can also use the warn method, and the warn method will output it within a warning type format, console info, which will provide the content as information, as info. So this is going to actually output within the Chrome browser the same way as the console log. And there's several other commonly used console methods that you can make use of when you're debugging and you're editing your code. Commenting is another important part when you are writing code, and this is going to provide a way to provide more context as well as some debugging when you are creating code. So if you want info message, and commenting can be done with using the 2 forward slashes, and this content isn't going to be output onto the page. It's just for information and context that's going to be within the code itself. You can also use it for debugging. So if you don't want to run a line of code, you can use the 2 forward slashes to comment out that line of code, and that's going to prevent it from running and also being rendered out within the console. You can use the forward slash and the asterisk in order to create multiple lines commented, and you can also comment out multiple lines of code this way as well when you're debugging. So now all of this code within the green is not going to get rendered out, as this is all commented out. The good thing about it is that when you are debugging, this is a quick and easy way to prevent lines of code from running so that you can debug it in order to determine out what the problem is and provide a solution for the code. And white space within the JavaScript is going to get ignored, and that's not going to affect how it's being rendered out. So it just skips over it. White space within the code is typically used in order to make it more readable, and this is going to be indicated with various blocks of code. You can set up a block of code using the curly brackets, and we're going to be covering more about that in the upcoming lessons. But although just within the block of code, this is going to make the code immediately more readable when we've got related code together and it is indented. And the indents, just like the other white space within the code, is just going to get ignored, and it's going to render out the content as normal. The console object in JavaScript is part of the window object. So the window object is a giant object that we're going to be looking at in more detail coming up. And this contains a bunch of different methods. So one of them is the console log message. Another commonly used one that you might see is the alert. So the alert provides us that little pop-up window whenever the page loads, and this is also included within the window object. So the window object itself has a number of different objects and methods and properties related to the window. So the window alert will pop up that alert window, and until the user takes an action by clicking the OK, the rest of the code is not going to load. We are running through the code and the browser is reading the JavaScript code. It's read the console log, output the window in the console log. When it encountered the alert method, it stopped executing the rest of the code until we complete the action on this line. So you don't have to include the within the alert. So go ahead and try it out, create some console messages, also add in some commenting into the code, and try out the alert method, and you'll be ready to move on to the next lesson.